on the Kunstberg, on the Mont des Arts, and hello to you too, people online watching us, joining us for this debate, this panel discussion on Brussels. I see people at the back. You're welcome to join us. There are plenty of seats available here at the front, so do come closer and join us for this discussion on the city of Brussels. In a moment, I will introduce our panelists, but let me tell you first that in my family, there's a saying going around. Whenever you encounter or meet someone or something new, you are being asked, is it love at first sight? Or was it a taste to be acquired, like olives and beer? Now, I've been living in Brussels for over 20 years, and I have to tell you, it was a taste to be acquired. It wasn't love at first sight. But as soon as you allow Brussels to conquer your heart and soul, then there's no way back. You love it with all its imperfections. Your heart bleeds for all its shortcomings. You rejoice for all its opportunities and possibilities, and you get excited and angry about what might and sometimes doesn't change for the better. So Brussels, a place de passage, a collection of communes, a cuckoo kid-like capital, and both from regions, a country and a continent even. It's a model and a model. And so that's what we will be discussing here today with these four panelists. Also, let me repeat that you are invited to put your questions to the panel at the end of the debate. We will make sure there's time for your questions too. So get ready, I would say. Take this opportunity. Also, the debate will be in English, some sprinkling of French and Dutch or any other language you might feel like talking. Of course, this is an international festival. That's why the new Bauhaus, new European Bauhaus Festival is what this is about. Okay, so the guests. Philippe Claus, let me start with you. Our mayor of Brussels, capital of Belgium and the European Union, and much else besides. Philippe Claus is a politician with a long-standing career in the Socialist Party. In the past, Mr. Claus was also an alderman for tourism, and that's not irrelevant to this discussion. Elke van den Brandt, welcome to you too. Minister of Mobility and Public Works for the Greens in the government of the Brussels region. She introduced the speed limit of 30 kilometers per hour in the city region and is currently working to roll out 40 kilometers of cycling lanes. Steven Beckers, welcome to you too. Mr. Becker's great passion is to make cities productive in every which way possible, from city farms to circular economy. He has both worked in Anderlecht. You may know the aquaponic farm on the roof of the abattoir. Perhaps some of you know it. He's worked in the European Quarter as well, at the Mont building. He's an architect and consultant and developer, but most of all, he's a man of ideas about the city of the future. And last but not least, Antoine Dutrieux recreates the city at grassroots level with his non-profit organization Comuna. They dedicate themselves to the temporary use of vacant buildings, filling the spaces in ways that bring people together, one of the ideas of the new European Bauhaus. They empower these people, inspire them, let them inspire each other, and give them ownership of their environment. Art, beauty, and an ecological way of life play a big role in what and how his vision for the city here and now constitutes of. So now you know. Up to you, because I've been talking for way too long. In preparing for this discussion, I asked each one of you to think of a hidden gem, a secret, beautiful place in Brussels, close to your hearts, that not everyone may know of, not one of the top tourist sites. So I'll go around the four of you and ask you to share with us one of your hidden gems. And I'm starting with you, Elke van den Brandt.
Hello, thank you very much. I have a big hidden gem, actually, and it's full with hidden gems within the hidden gem. And for me, it's the site of Tour and Taxis, which is a renovated part of, actually, it's a part of a town where you have old and new, and you have a reconstruction of the heritage. So the architectural renovation is done in a beautiful way. You have inside places, outside places, you have horeca, you have housing, offices, you have a bit of everything together. But it is full with hidden places. You have this wall where a legal wall to put graffiti on, which my son really loves. You have this little park that is connecting bigger parks, so, and that is beautiful. It's you enter and you start with a green, and it continues, and thanks also to the city of Brussels, it's growing and growing, and for me that shows what Brussels can be. It's connecting nature to the heritage, but also in a neighborhood which is the other side of the canal. The canal in Brussels is actually dividing the city, has been dividing the city for a long time, and it's at the poor side of the canal, and it is really in neighborhoods that deserve to be discovered also by tourists. So I think that for me is the most beautiful place. And perhaps tell you one thing about the park. It's when I live nearby, that's why I like it, of course. And in the beginning when it opens, it was a long way. There's a part of the park which is a long way to the railroad. And it was a lost space actually that was opened and renovated to make a little park connecting a neighborhood to the bigger park, and it's with a gate to enter, but it's always open. And the first time when I went there, I went to discover, and one of the people in the neighborhood said, no, it's private, you cannot go in there. I said, no, it's a public space. No, that can't be, it's so beautiful, it must be private. And that's something that touched me really hard, because the people in that neighborhood we're not used to having governments investing in them, in their neighborhood, and showing them, this is for you, this is your public space. For me, is a very important motivator to make sure that when we're investing in public space, do it in all neighborhoods, and making sure that everybody feels an owner of this public space and feels welcome in a public space.
So the site of Tour and Taxis is something to be discovered and explored. Antoine Dutrieux, what's your hidden gem?
Thank you for the moment. So I have a little problem here, because I can't really share about only one hidden gem. I would rather share about 1 million or maybe 6 million of them. Why so many? I'm not going to talk for an entire day, obviously, but we could see actually a few years ago that there are in Brussels about 6.5 million square meters of empty buildings in the region of Brussels. And as you might have heard through the introduction of Annelies, I'm obviously very excited when I see an empty space, because it just creates in me like a wave of imagination, of inspiration, of what we could do with this empty space. Just quickly, in 2019, we actually realized this about those million square meters of empty buildings, and we realized that there wasn't actually 19 municipalities in Brussels, but 20 of them, and one of them is what we call Saint-Vide-Leegbeek. So yeah, I would talk about all these empty spaces, and what we do in them is indeed a place where we can recreate connection between the people, when we can also give the citizens some ownership on the city. One of them that I can think of just straight away like this is a place in Forêt, in Vorst, called Maxima. It's an office building where we created a mixed city of users. Like there is housing for women who are victims of violences. There are office spaces, there are sports places, there are cycling ateliers, there are a lot of artist ateliers as well. So we try to create an environment where a new dynamic is started, and when people realize that actually they can bond together as well as empower each other. And we think that through these little cracks in the city, we can actually try to bring up their voices to the people who, some of them are on stage with me now, who are making the cities, and so that they can make the cities inspired by us citizens. Voilà.
Thank you for that beautiful idea. Monsieur le bourgmestre, quel est votre jewel préféré?
Well, it's maybe strange, but I think about the symmetry of Brussels. Because if you want to discover Brussels, Brussels is a hidden city. It's not very easy to discover. There are so many things different, and you know, it's a very complicated city. And as you said, that's not the first time that you love this city. And the symmetry of Brussels is very strange, because it's the place where they are the history of Brussels, but the people who think about this symmetry 2 centuries ago think about this symmetry like a garden. It's not like the common symmetry in the other city with only with the people who's burying there, for the family to visit. There are a lot of family who goes there. There's also a lot of history of Brussels. For example, Henri Lafontaine, the former Nobel Prize, Belgian Nobel Prize, was buried there. But there's also all the soldiers of the World War I and World War II, also common people. But all what you can discuss, a lot of mayor was buried there. They are a sort of special place for the mayor. I don't know, it's not my place there, but it's really interesting that you have a place very special, and it's also a destination for a lot of family to go only to walk there. It's very strange because in a cemetery, normally you don't want to go in a cemetery because it's always a sad place, and there are this dimension, maybe the exception, like in Les Pères Lachaise in Paris, because you want to see the place where Jim Morrison or other people are buried on. But in the cemetery of Brussels, there are so many people in the neighborhood, they use this cemetery as a garden. And I think it's very interesting is the contrast of Brussels, that you can use a place with another destination than the primary destination. And I think as you place about the vacant building is always the same. And we talk a lot about the chrono-urbanism, that the
Meaning what? Meaning what? What does that mean?
What does it mean? That you can use a place with a different destination that was sought in the past. Yeah. It's very important that in Brussels, because you know that the densification of Brussels is one of the difficulty for the future, that we can use some place different that we did it in the past.
So just like the cemetery of Brussels, like you say, used as a park almost or a city garden. Mr. Beckers, what is your hidden gem?
Okay, I will bounce back on what Antoine said. It's not only one, and I like the idea of hidden gems for Brussels because most people, when they cross it the first time, they don't see it, apart from Grand Place or places like that. In fact, there is one particularity in Brussels, is that virtually every house is different. The typical city house with its sort of 6.5 meter wide and all that is almost always on the same plan with 3 rooms in depth, and then some amazing things inside the city islands. That's other hidden gems. And you said that I'm about today to make the city productive. The city was always productive in Brussels. The inside of these city islands were actually ateliers and workshops and city
islands, you have to explain for a second that that's the inner garden. So,
yeah. And it's very dense, as Philippe said. It's extremely dense. It's all divided in very, very small bits. We have a problem now. We have a problem which is called circular economy in one end, which is my dada, certainly for many years. But we need to rebuild the city on the city, but with keeping all these hidden gems. You know, not only Horta buildings, and which is the famous Art Nouveau architect, which certainly was an inspiration for many other buildings. But today we need space to be able to rebuild the city in the city. And I think the city needs to have its industry back, clean industry, local industry, and not only small things, but also very big things with the Port of Brussels and big areas that can be developed. And I'm sure Philippe will follow that, because it's on your territory, that there is some space left. But also there are some ugly buildings in Brussels, many of them, in fact.
Can they be gems, or should we get rid of them?
Well, no, I think there are future gems. Some of them are listed and should not be. Personally, that's a feeling sometimes where we should be able to, and we have very good architects. I'm one, but I speak about the others. There are many very good architects who are capable of transcending the architecture again in the city, while making these buildings future-proof in terms of insulation and energy and water treatment and biodiversity and the rest of what we call regenerative circular economy.
Okay, but now you're talking about future gems. The question was, what is your current gem? Because you mentioned a lot.
Okay,
if you have to pick one thing that people can go and visit or find, or
okay, then it will be a gem I created, which is the big farm in Anderlecht. It's bigh.farm. If you look on internet, you can visit it. And it's an oasis in Anderlecht, which is a upcoming area, one of the upcoming areas of Brussels. There's a lot of new housing coming and all that. It's a bit too slow, but that's Brussels region. You need the movement to start. And it's 4,000 square meters of terrace, external gardens, but also a aquaponic production, as you kindly mentioned earlier on, where we produce 25 tons of Brussels trouts, which are rainbow trouts, which you can find in restaurants, and that's going to be developed internationally. So it's a gem that's going to make small gems in other cities as well.
That's going to produce more gems. Thank you very much for sharing those gems, those secret gems with all of us. I have a question for Antoine. Why do you think are there so many places left empty or overlooked in Brussels? Why is that?
It's a hard question.
Okay.
I don't have a PhD in such matter, but I'm going to try to explain it. There are several different causes to this. There are some buildings that are publicly owned and that for some reason are empty because they don't comply the norm anymore, or the project has ended, and as Stephen said, it takes a lot of time for the public administration to get the permits, find the money, start the works. So sometimes, for those reasons, the buildings are empty. And then there's obviously the major issue of speculation, where people buy buildings and they leave them empty rather, because it actually uses more money to redevelop them than to leave them empty. And it's just a placement, an investment in bricks without doing anything. And this is obviously something that we would like to tackle.
So when, just one more question on that point. When you, with Comuna, take possession of a place like that, are you squatting? Is it illegal what you do, or how does that work?
It's exactly the opposite. So we got inspired from this practice of squatting, but we turned it into a legal practice. The idea is that we now get asked to occupy a building because owners realize that it's actually a service that we can provide them. 10 years ago, we used to cycle through the streets and check the buildings and probably contact the owners, but now it's not like this anymore. So there are actually a lot of public calls published by the public authorities. So people start to understand that this is something that is an advantage for the owners. And so basically the idea is that we sign a contract, so everybody's protected. We get the keys, we use it, heat it, insure it, and then we create a social cultural project in it. So at the end of the day, when a building is empty for a year, it gets derelict. Winter is hard, rain is hard, vandalism is hard here in Brussels, so it destroys the building. So people have an advantage to use it rather than to leave it empty.
Operating as a kind of caretaker, indeed.
Exactly.
Yeah. Monsieur Close, yeah, this sounds like a cheap and a good solution for a mayor who cannot maybe decide on every building on his territory and doesn't have the money to keep up all the property of the city itself. But how do you feel about buildings in the city? Are there enough buildings? This was talked about in earlier panel sessions as well. Should we go into the future with the buildings that are there now, or do you feel it's important for a city in order to be future-proof to keep building landmark buildings that a city has to have a identity through building? How do you feel about that?
Well, it depends. It's always a combination of a lot of things. You know, during so many years, Brussels authority didn't decide for the future of their own city. You know, it's only at the end of the 20th century that the Brussels authority can decide for the urbanism and for the construction. During so many years, we are a using city, only for the people, for the users, not for the inhabitants. And I think one of the big revolutions in Brussels is the same with Europe, I think, is why the moment when we decide for ourselves, with a goal, a common goal for Brussels, for Belgium, for Europe. But during so many years, for example, in the European area, in the European district, no one would decide the future. There's only a superposition of the demand of the European authority, without the advice of the inhabitants, of the authority.
So it's really something from outside planted in the city of Brussels and no real connection is what you're saying.
Yeah, there are no real connection, and then they are a sort of, the European authority don't trust about the inhabitant, they don't trust in the Brussels authority, they don't trust about the federal government. Now we try to build another future together with the city, the region, the association, architect, all the people, is what we do here with the new Bauhaus. It's to think about this future, common future, that there are a place for everyone. For example, I use always this example. We are now the most important diplomatic city of the world. But 20 years ago, we didn't know about this future. It's because it's sure you need European Union, NATO, and the other international organizations. We are also the most cosmopolitan city of the world, with 184 nationalities every day living together in Brussels. In fact, we have the second one. The first one is Dubai, but Dubai is a little bit artificial. But for me, what is important with the building, with all the public area, is to decide with the people, with all the actors of the city, of this common future. And I know that Brussels is not like a museum city with the same building, the same street, the same public area. It's a little punk city. Yeah. There are so many, and I defend that. I think it's also important to say, okay, there are a place for everyone, and there are some activity very different in different areas. But for me as a mayor, what is very important is to link the people and to link the project.
It sounds great. And I don't want to turn this into a purely political discussion, not at all, but I mean, it is very complex in Brussels, you have to admit. I mean, even before Brussels got to decide about its own territory 20 years ago, I mean, there are the commune, there are different layers, there are regions, national level, European level, and then including the citizens. It all sounds very good, but is it possible at all to do that, mevrouw Van den Brand?
We have to make it possible, and I think it's true. Brussels is complex, and I think every politician is sometimes frustrated about it, and we do need to change it. But in the meantime, you need to have a plan, you need to go forward, and I think it's a disadvantage, but it has two advantages. The complexity makes that you need to collaborate. You cannot do something on your own in Brussels. You always need to work together. And that's good because you create this mindset of working together on your city. So that's one advantage of the disadvantage. Another element is also that I think Brussels is complex, but we are the glue of Belgium, we are the glue of Europe. I think what's keeping Belgium together with Walloon and Flanders, who are drifting a bit apart, is Brussels. So we are getting it together. And also Europe. There's a lot of bad vibes about this and that is decided in Brussels, and okay, they can be a bit mad at Brussels, but it is decisions being taken on a European scale. It is about collaboration on a European scale. It is about working together. It is about peace. So there is a lot behind the importance of Brussels and the glue that we are. And so, yes, it's complex. Yes, we need to make it work. Yes, it's frustrating sometimes, and it's slowing down some processes, but there is also some richness in this, and I think that's important to use this richness and together to have a plan. And I think that's something that we have in Brussels. So the region and, for example, the city of Brussels, we're all behind the idea of a 10-minute city, which is about making sure that if you redevelop a city, you cannot do every building and every moment, but that the bigger picture is how can we create this 10-minute city where from where you live, within 10 minutes you have a school, you have access to healthcare, you have access to culture, to bars and restaurants, and to make sure that in planning this city, we share this vision. And then there can be difference. There is a difference between the city of Brussels and Woluwe or Kuregem, so there's this diversity. There's a huge difference on the income, on the green in Brussels. So it is possible, and we can create it. And I think finding this common vision is crucial for our future.
Unity in diversity. European slogan, so to speak, but also goes for Brussels, is what I hear. Do you think it is possible to really blend all these different faces, aspects, realities, socioeconomically speaking, culturally speaking, in so many ways, historically speaking, of all these areas in this region?
We keep thinking we are very clever, but look at nature, it's far more complex. anything else. And frankly, I work internationally, and it's not any better anywhere else.
Okay, that is good news then.
So you have to take it as something which is richness. The 180, forgot how many nationalities. It's only 50. It's 150 in Anderlecht that I know. But it's quite amazing. It's an opportunity. We don't have a sort of split population with really bad neighborhoods and whatever. We had some difficulties, but it's really improved.
We have bad neighborhoods everywhere, is what you're saying? Poorer neighborhoods, or?
Yes, but I think. I mean, of course, like any city, there are problems, but we have a tolerance. We have a way of discussing. Today, when we work on a project, whether it's an urban design or a building, we don't look only at the object. We look at what is around, and in fact, this complexity feeds the ideas, and even more when you talk to the population and you bring them together. Before, when we were working on a project, it was like, shh, don't tell anybody we're doing this project. We present it, and we hope during the holiday it's going to pass. Okay.
So that nobody will
it's not
protest
possible anymore.
or go to the courts and protest, and that it will just...
exactly. So it remains complex and a long process. I think it's improving in terms of planning approvals and all that, but it's still taking too much time, but okay, it's a situation that can be improved because that's really administrative. But I could really see that we're making progress, and we have to bear in mind that Brussels is an exemplary city for many things, including ecology in terms of low energy buildings and passive buildings and all that. We've made some mistakes, but we are examples for other cities.
But when you speak of low energy buildings and so on, a big issue now is a housing crisis, not only in Brussels, but in many, many cities across the globe, and it's only getting worse. Yeah. Renovation is always put forward as one of the actions that can help actually reduce energy costs and create a more healthy and safe and affordable way of living. But solar panels or even just renovation is not affordable for everyone. That is a fact in Brussels as well. I imagine that is a reality that you come across quite often. So is this more than hopeful talk and dream, and can this kind of ideas about green buildings only be applied to new buildings, or do you see a chance to really implement that, Antoine, on a large scale and for all inhabitants of the city?
I just bought a house. I'm just about to start the renovations, and the project is to do an affordable, resilient and ecological project with we don't have a lot of money. So I hope that if this type of ideas occur in people like me, they can also occur in others, and they can be widespread to a lot of people. And
now you're talking about ideas, so you're saying this is about your mindset and you as an owner. But do you feel we as individuals are responsible for that, or do you feel this is also a matter of what the authorities should stimulate or help with?
Of course, there are always improvements to be done. I think there's a new system of the prime, like renovation support, financial support, that is put in place in the region, and it's very, I don't know, is it?
Renolution is the name. So it's my colleague Alain Moreau, but I'm very fond of it because we need to help people doing so. That's,
so I think it's very supportive, can always be more. Self-renovation is not supported, for example, this is how you make cheap works in a house. But generally, I have the feeling that, first of all, the political world is getting younger. It might sound stupid, but if I am 25 years old and I need to talk to a person who's 65, there's a generational gap, there's some misunderstandings, and there's also, it's intimidating. Right now, all the politicians that I meet, I say tu. It might sound stupid, but I feel close to them. Hopefully they feel close to me instead of vous. We talk to each other, but we call by our first name. There's this, and there's matter also. I have the feeling that what I say or what I do is heard, at least by some of the people who are leading the political
It's
game.
more
So
openness.
I think it's hopeful.
Yeah. Is that something that you implement consciously to open up politics for citizens, or do you only get complaints, Mr. Mayor?
What I want to repeat is that sustainability is three things. And we speak always about environment, but we need to speak about economy and social. For example, Mr. Speak about this prim, and it's very important, but at the beginning of the 21st century, this is only for the owners. They are nothing for the people who rent an apartment or a house, and nothing for the social housing. And then they pay with a double penalty. They pay more for the energy, and they live not in a good apartment. Then it's the role of...
There are waiting lists, so
There are waiting lists
for social
to find that
housing.
apartment. But for the people who live in this apartment, in the building, the social housing that that was built in the middle of the 20th century, that's really awful for the energy. And then they pay sometimes more for the energy than for the rent.
Yeah.
And that's a real problem. Then we invest no more than 100 million euro only for the social housing. Because it's very strange. When we think about sustainability, we think that everyone are on the same start, but it's not true. Because we know all four, we have lots of sensibility, we study, we read a lot of books, but the first victims of the climate change, of all of this, is the poor people. It's why I repeat always that a policy without social, and in particular with sustainability, is nonsense for me. And we need to think, it's also important for me, to think first of all about these people. These people have no car, they are no owner, they are sometimes not the money to go to special farm. And what is important, for example, in the project of Stephen, it's in a special poor area that we call, I'm sorry, that's not the good term, upcoming area. But it's very important to show also that in the city, the sustainability is not reserved only for the people who have the money to do it. And then for the housing, for example, it's very, very important for me to speak about the social housing, renovation, but also building new social housing.
But is it feasible in a city that is also a city de passage, some areas especially, new people coming in, there are house owners taking advantage of people with no means to pay properly and who have to put up with horrible places to stay. What can you do as politicians, as rulers of the city and the region to tackle that?
The goal, the real asset of a city is always the mixed city. If you mix the different people who live in your own area, in your own neighborhood, it's always a success. If you do only rich area and poor area in other sides, it's always very dangerous. Then it's maybe a real asset of Brussels is that all, as we know, the banlieue, like in France, are inside the city. They are both people who are living together, like the 184 nationalities. The poor and the rich people live together. You know, Brussels is the richest city of Belgium, with 20% of the GDP of the country. But there are poor people in Brussels. And what our goal of me, the other public authorities, is to link all what we produce in Brussels with the people who live also in Brussels. Also with people who only comes in Brussels to work. There are no problem for that. But we need to find something, also a solution for all the people who live in Brussels, for the inhabitants.
Financing, you want to react to that? Or?
Yes, with a lot of it. So
go ahead.
It's true. We often make a division about public space and private space and how can we make housing more eco-friendly, and it's essential. If you want to tackling climate change is costly, but not tackling climate change is much more costly. We will pay for it. The poorest people, the first. We see it. The air quality is the worst in the poorest areas in Brussels. It's a one-on-one link, so it is essential. But for me, it's important that we find solution for social housing. For example, the commune of Saint-Gilles, they are putting solar panels on the social housing, and in that way making sure that with the collectivity they invest in it. So we need to find solutions for it. But for me, it's essential to have this global view and to realize that investing in climate resilient cities is investing in the climate, but it's also investing in good quality of life and making sure, for example, if you have more green in the public space, it's good for the climate, but it's good for people to be in. It gives you a better quality of life, especially in those neighborhoods who are the most dense, to make sure. And it's often good also for your wallet. If we go on renovating houses, we renovate houses because it's good for the climate, but it's also good for the local employment. It is putting local people to renovating, so it is a local employment. It's good for the energy factor of people. So I get a bit angry when people say it's expensive or it's difficult to invest in climate change. No, it is difficult, it's challenging, but it is making the city better. And we also need to think about how we make this division between public and private place, that we open it up more. In Brussels, most of the people don't have a garden, don't have a terrace, so the public space is a bit their home, and you need to make sure that people feel like home in it, and that you organize it in a way that it is there for the people who are living, using, visiting this city. And we can win a lot, and we can win a lot of efficiency, because we don't need all to have our own garden. It's a nice dream, but it's impossible if we have more than 1.2 billion people. You cannot give everybody a garden, but make sure that people feel welcome to have a drink here in this public space, that they have safe spaces to be in. And in that way, we can create a more intelligent city, a more resilient city, and make sure that it will be a nice place to visit, to live in, to work in. And for me, that is where the future is. Yeah.
Steven Beckers, you were nodding. You
yes,
agree with everything?
Yes, almost. No, for me, first of all, we are here because of the new European Bauhaus, and when we talk about the 3 pillars of sustainability, beauty is the fourth one. It's the fourth leg that really makes it work, and I think that's what Ursula von der Leyen wanted to put back in the game. In terms of
put software in the hardware, put a soul in the project and the logistic and politics.
Well, meaning, zin, as men says in Netherlands. That, for me, for affordable housing, where there is renovation, we work on Renolution project as well, so it's very interesting to see the extent. 25,000 houses to renovate each year is a huge job. And as I said, the city itself needs to be productive to be able to, let's say, in an affordable way, produce the maybe standardized products, even for affordable new housing, standardized product. Today you can prefabricate everything with every piece being different because of robotic, because of computer work, programs and all that. So you can do beautiful architecture that should be cheaper. But you need to do it at a bigger scale. And also you have to try not to import, not only for ecological reason and for logistics and for mobility, but you have not to import things from too far. And there are many things we can produce. We can, of course, circular economy is also about not wasting material, raw material, and reusing it in the region, or let's say in the metropolitan area, because you cannot do everything within the city. But it's really a way of dropping the price. It's not going to happen in one day. And as the minister said, it takes time, but to be resilient, you really have to do it now and at a big scale. We don't have time for gadgets anymore, for testing. My farm is, for me, a gadget. Now the next one should be 10 times bigger. And we need to really make it sound, both in economical terms, social terms, with social economy, and the environmental aspect.
And in terms of material, what should we envision then of construction materials, for example? You say build the fabric somewhere, or?
This morning I was in Mont talking to a company that's doing zero carbon cement a few weeks ago, and it's coming to Belgium, maybe not to Brussels because we need the space. We're talking about carbon negative concrete, from recuperating demolition concrete to really make new concrete. It's a question of regulations on that, but they're already doing it in Holland. So we need also to look at what's happening. That's the great thing about Europe, is in fact, we have lots of ideas, but lots of solutions that exist. And this sort of events of the new European Bauhaus should be also the platform to actually put these things together and say, hey, look, in Amsterdam, they are doing already close to 500,000 tons of new concrete from old concrete. And it's better concrete than even from new granulates. So it's quite unbelievable. And so we need to develop that. It's going to start probably in Liège. It's not too far. We have the canal. We have the transport. Mobility with the canal is essential. We were yesterday with Shipit, who are installed on the canal, doing the the logistics for construction to avoid to have, I don't know how many thousands, you probably know better than I do, but thousands of lorries per year in the city. And the lorry is not only a lorry on the road, it's a lorry blocking the road. And it's storage of material in the street while you're building. And so that can happen in the port of Brussels. This, again, is something quite unique. It happens a little bit in UK, it happens a little bit in Holland, and now Brussels is showing the way. It's fantastic.
So that's really rethinking the city on a different level, on a different scale.
Yeah, just to add one example,
Yes.
it's also using local materials. And we always think we don't have it in Brussels. There's a lot of local materials. This one company in Brussels who's using wood from the Zoniewoud. It's a big forest, and they're using the cleanup wood. So the wood that needs to be needs to get out for maintenance of the forest.
Yeah.
And if you only take this recuperation wood, you can make sure that all the new ceilings that are necessary for parquet, I say parquet floors, wooden floors, that you can use it. So it's also about using the materials that exist and being more creative in using our city and being a productive city, not shipping taking wood from the other side of the world, and we're now shipping out our wood and making sure that we have a local circular economy, and there's a lot to win there, and there's a lot of potential that is for the moment not being used.
Before we open the floor to the audience, I would like to bring in one concrete example also of change in the city. I think it's this weekend that 10 years of Picnic the Streets is being celebrated. This was, for those who don't know or remember, an action and something organized by citizens of the city of Brussels. They occupied a Beursplein. In order to demand that it should be made traffic-free, free of cars and so on. And 10 years later, you may have noticed, or you may know, that the whole boulevard between the Beurs, even Fontenas, and Broekère is made a pedestrianized zone. So, is it fair to say? Were you there at the time, Antoine? For example,
I wasn't partying.
You wasn't. You weren't
in
taking.
Brussels, yes, sure.
Yeah, but not picnicking in
No.
the streets. No. Okay. But is it fair to say that at that time the push had to come from the citizens themselves? Politics at that time was not going to move. There were too many conflicting interests. Whereas now, maybe, as you mentioned before, there's more open ears? There are more open ears, would you say?
I would say, I mean, the city is made by several different worlds that meets. There's the political world, there's the company world, who have a lot of financial interests and probably also visions. At the end of the day,
Small business
Sure.
owners.
At the end of the day, again,
tourism.
I think it's important, and I guess also this program, the European Bauhaus, is about this, is to put the citizens back at the center of it, because those are the ones who enjoy it, who suffer from it. So I think the example you give is obviously very, it's marquant.
Like it's significant
exactly.
in that sense, yeah.
And I think this is exactly the association I'm working for, but as well as so many other people are trying to create those bubbles everywhere, and not only about the public space, but also about the housing crisis, the ecological crisis, and all the sectors that touch the people, the education, the arts.
So there are lots of good practices that you are actually offering as an inspiration to decision makers.
And the fact that we make it seriously, and that we can be looked at as a serious actor in the sector who, we are square in
You're not revolutionaries, is what you're saying? Or
somehow, yes, but we try to work with the people that are around us rather than against. And I think that the fact that we are serious makes us and the others be a potential partner for the people who make the city with us. So I think it's very important that, yes, we keep organizing ourselves rather than fighting. That's my point of view, obviously.
Thank you for that. Burgemeester Kloze, you were not the mayor at the time of Picnic the Streets, but you were already in politics and
I'm the mayor during the walks of the
Voilà,
pedestrian zone.
exactly. I was going to ask
It's really
you,
easy.
how do you look back on those 10 years? What have you learned? What will you take into the future as a lesson of that whole episode that's not finished and it's not over yet? I mean, there's still debate going on about how it's organized, what its cost was and is to a number of stakeholders, if I may use that word. So what did it teach you?
But first of all, one of the biggest problems for all public authorities is the time.
The time?
The time. All the things take too much time. Because when we decide something, and after the end of the process, it's maybe after 6 or 7 years. And then for the trust between the citizen and the public authority is very difficult. If you see what it happens with the pedestrian zone, we decided in 2014. And the end of the works, it's 6 years later. And it's very quick, 6 years, for 1.5 kilometers of pedestrian zone. It's one of the problem. But for me, what the learnings of the pedestrian zone for me is that what is really important is to share the public area. It's not the problem of mobility. Mobility, it's a middle. It's all we can share different things. I talk about the chrono-urbanism. How can we share the different space? How could we occupy the different museums? For example, I use always this example. It's not the public area, it's not mobility. During the pandemic, we had a lot of students who say, okay, there are a lot of digitalization, we have no problem with the computer, no problem with the Wi-Fi, but we are no place to study. We are no bibliothèque for us. There are no place where we can go with our computer. And now we use more and more administration after the hours when the authorities and the people who work in the administration goes out to use that for the student. It's the same thinking that for the public area.
Like you said,
use it during the day
purpose.
with one destination, and after that, there are maybe, look what we do here. Look what we do here. Normally, it's not the place for debate. It's a place where the people goes around, they goes in the public area, and now we decide to do it here outside. It's for me the future of Brussels and the future of the city, to think about other utilization of the public area and of the building.
But I'm also curious about one more thing in that regard. The debate that's continuing about how to use public space. It sounds like, okay, this should be open, everybody should be able to use it. But of course, there are conflicting interests. For example, there is the touristical angle that you can take to look at public space. Or do you say no, local small businesses should get the last say in how we use this space? Or should it be the ones living around the corner? How do you negotiate all those different outlooks on a public space? Because that's at the heart of the discussion, isn't it?
But it's not the public space. It's how do you decide that more inhabitants comes in your street to live? For me, we have this plan we call the city in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
We need to build more public infrastructure like school, cultural centrum, sports centrum, green area, public transport, commercial. If you do it in your city, there are more and more inhabitants in your city. For example, the city of Brussels, in 20 years, there's 55,000 people more. For the region, Brussels region, is 200,000 people more in 20 years. It's because the people have this feeling that it's better to live in the city than outside the city. There are people who go outside also, but the figures are very clear. There are more and more people who decide to live in the city. It's for me a good reason to go forward with this destination. And with the tourists, there are a lot of people who say, yeah, but be careful with the tourists. Okay, but the tourist is also employment. It's also economy. Then we need to find the balance. It's like when I speak about the European area. If you do only a place for the office there, it's really boring also for the people who work there. What happens now in the European area? More green area, more restaurant, more housing, more culture.
Will the buildings be opened to people after hours like the...
I think it's very important to discover that. We do it in our new administration. There are more than 350 places only for students after the hours.
And you
After-
say Europe could copy that example, for example.
I give an example. During so many years, it's impossible for the common citizen to visit the European Parliament. Or what do we want the citizens? To discover where the representative of the citizen goes. It's very difficult. It's more easy to visit United Nations than European Parliament. Now, the parliamentarian exists, the Museum of Europe exists. There are so many places to discover Europe. Our new goal is to do something very good, and with the support of, it's one of the great projects of Elke, of the Schumann plane. The Schumann plane, everyone knows about that. The Berlaymont, the building of the council, there are so many images of that, but it's not very a good image of Brussels and European institutions.
So you want to open it
and
up
then we
and
have
make
this
it
project with the
accessible.
region to do something very better and to give at the European citizen, European people, a better image of the European building.
Okay. Clear stories. You want to add one last thing, because then I want to open the floor?
Yeah, very shortly, you mentioned the problem with time. I think I have a solution for that, if I may give an advice.
We love solutions.
Is the notion of roadmap. If we build a solution and a vision, not a solution, a vision altogether, there are many ways of getting to the vision. And when you have a mandate of 3, 4, 5, 10 years as politicians, but it's the same thing in the private sector.
I'm for a mandate of 10 years, I agree.
Yeah, okay.
Mandate of 10 years.
That's not going to happen tomorrow.
No
I
comment.
Don't think.
No, but it's very important to be able to do things steps by steps. And I'm saying that because I have a problem with the way the pedestrianized area, not specifically here, but in many places, and happened. It was done in one go. And there was no roadmap to get there slowly but surely. And in fact, in many cities, and I worked on Toulouse and Montpellier and whatever, where inhabitants were fleeing out of the city when it became pedestrianized, because there was less security, there was less, in fact, urban noise. And even worked with an acoustician to see how we could resolve the problem of somebody kicking in a can in the street at 2 o'clock in the morning, and you have 20 people opening the lights, opening the windows and throwing their shoes at that person, because it was too silent. And in fact, there are things like that we have to be very careful with not... Let me give another example. I was talking about concrete earlier on. Why do I work on concrete and glass? Because I was fed up with people saying everything should be built in wood. I love wood, but we have to look at all these things. Nature is variation, and public space also should be varied. And maybe it's a question also of using differently at night, during the day, the weekend, the public space, also in terms of mobility. So that's just an advice on creating a roadmap rather than changing in one go. Not
Or
all,
even
not
if the
all
one go takes
electric
6
cars,
years.
because it won't work. Not only that, or maybe not only having a painted light for the bicycles, but opening more and more, which I know you're trying to do, but more and more proper cycle tracks like you have in Holland.
Okay. I know you want to react, but maybe it's going to be addressed by people in the audience. I see fingers, yes. A microphone is coming your way. Please state your name and what your question is and to whom it is addressed, if you like.
Okay,
Please.
yes, my name is Paola Momori. Hi. I love this city. I love Brussels. I've been living here for many years, and I have a question for you, Minister. First, thank you for your work. Keep going. There are many people that support you, and I am one of them, so go ahead. Thank you for the 30 kilometers an hour, too. And my question is about cars. By when will we have a city with less cars, where even cars can pay to get in? So free of cars. When will we have that?
Okay. Everybody heard the question, when will we have a city free of cars?
The whole city free of cars, I think that's a dream image, but there will be cars in Brussels. But the idea is to have fewer cars, and that's an essential goal. And it's important that there's a roadmap for it. We have the roadmap. It's called Good Move. It's a mobility plan. It's a plan for 10 years. So we created, and we're step by step getting there. And the ambition of Good Move is to have 30% of cars, fewer cars in Brussels, and also not have the cars everywhere, to have a more intelligent design of where you put your traffic, and make sure that you canalize the car traffic through the main axes that are the more apt for it, and make sure that in neighborhoods neighborhoods where people live, where your children should be able to go out, go to school without being afraid of their life, where you can meet one another so that you have low-car neighborhoods. And that's one of the things that we're implementing for the moment, but it takes a roadmap. You cannot say, well, overnight, now this is finished. It takes a roadmap. And for example, the city of Brussels is a huge partner in this event. They have the historical heart of Brussels, the Pentagon, has now this circulation plan that will be implemented this summer. And I know, so I thank you for the support, but I think you need to support also all the other politicians that are putting their in front of it, but I know it will be a difficult time. It will be difficult to explain to people that things are changing. Change is always something that reacts to things. But the goal is to make sure that you can still access if you need to, if you have a lot of baggage or you need to visit your grandmother and you have a reason that you can still get in. But all the cars driving through, we want to get them out of it. And for too long, Brussels was a city that it felt in a lot of neighborhoods, it was developed to get cars, get through them to get to the city center, people to work and go out. And I think that's crucial, and that's what Picnic the Streets has done for me. That's giving the people the feeling that we can also develop a city for the people to live in. And if we do it, it will be better for tourists. It will be better for the economy. It's not a contradiction. It is making a more nicer, more nice neighborhoods. And so these are the plans that we're putting in place. They will take some time. They will take some work on it. But we are putting the aim to it. We have this roadmap, and I hope that every year we can see we have more cyclists, more people walking, and fewer cars, and keep cars for those who don't have an alternative, but create a lot of more options and alternatives in our city.
Merci beaucoup. Une dernière question, Monsieur Claus. Ces projets que vous avez d'ouvrir les bâtiments à des étudiants, mais je pense qu'il y a très peu d'étudiants qui les connaissent. Faites-les connaître parce que c'est un très beau projet. Donc merci beaucoup, mais affichez-les un peu plus publiquement. Je pense qu'on n'est pas très connus.
Il y a plus de 800 places qui sont tout le temps occupées. Donc c'est normal, ça ne s'adresse pas à vous. Donc, mais je peux vous dire que dans nos quartiers populaires, ils n'ont pas le choix. Et donc ils y viennent dès qu'on ouvre ces places et on prend des endroits parfois complètement saugrenus. C'est pour ça que sur le centre administratif, on y a pensé tout de suite. Il y a énormément, et les places sont pleines immédiatement. Donc honnêtement, on le fait et on voit que chaque fois qu'on en crée, et on encourage les autres à le faire, elles sont remplies immédiatement. Parce qu'ils ont une force par rapport à nous. Vous savez, les étudiants, ça communique beaucoup plus vite que nous.
Merci beaucoup.
Okay, spread the word is what I would say. Maybe there's time for one more question. Someone? Lady with the microphone, there's a question right at the back.
Thank you. So, one of the problems of Brussels so far has been that the political parties that govern Brussels, most of their members don't live in Brussels. And so they don't want, for example, a tax for coming to Brussels with their car. And so one solution to that are citizen assemblies to give power back more to the people who live in Brussels. But then I would love to know your point of view on citizen assemblies. Are you going to support that? It would be great to make Brussels one of the examples in Europe and give more power to local people. Okay.
That question I'll translate as you've been talking about listening to citizens, rather to take them on board in the discussions, but how are you going to do that? Because it's easy to say so, but are you going to organize, for example, citizens panels, or how are you going to make sure that the input from citizens is taken seriously and really influencing the plans politicians are rolling out?
First of all the Brussels politicians need to live in Brussels to be a Brussels politician. Sure, in the Brussels Parliament or in the municipality, it's an obligation. Not at the federal, but for the rest, first of all. Secondly, I have a good example. Very hard things to do, it's the public transport. One of, for me, the response for another mobility is also the public transport. Bicycle is very important, and we are in charge with ELK of big projects. For example, in Nederoverenbeek, in the north of Brussels, we want to build a new tram. Normally, everybody is very happy. There are a new tram who comes in my neighborhood, it stops. That's not the case. There are a lot of people very awful, it's not necessary, we are against. And we organize a panel. First of all, it takes time. If you want to do something with the people, you need to know that it takes time. It's not with one meeting. You need to do a panel, to organize something different, to give time for the people to express. But you need also, I really like what Stephen has said, a roadmap. To say, first of all, we want a tram. Sorry, we have all the study. But we are together to speak about what is the best way for the tram, how can we connect other neighborhoods with that. Then it's always a balance with the democracy, direct democracy, and representative democracy, we say that? Yep. We say that as we know in the past. That's always this balance. There are a lot of experience about that. There are a lot of experience in Brussels. I'm one of my deputy mayors in charge of this new building relationship with the citizen. And it's really interesting that more and more, as Stephen said, the roadmap is more strong for the future. If you associate the people, they are invested. People are not agree that it exists always, but people understand more what is in the mind of the politics and of the mind of the authorities, the vision. Okay. But it takes time. First of all, you need to know that it takes time. If you do it only in one meeting, it doesn't work.
So, patience is what I hear. Ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, this is all the time that we have for this discussion, but it's an ongoing discussion. A city is a live thing, and of course the debate is far from over, on the contrary. I hope our guests will linger and mingle a little bit. Hopefully you can put any questions you still have to them. For now, for here on this stage, I would like to thank you, all four of you, for taking part, taking the time to come here and talk to us and share your ideas and hopes and fears for the future of the city of Brussels. And thank you for being here and sharing this with us. Enjoy the rest of the afternoon. It's fully... And just before you may go around roaming the Kunstberg, the Mont des Arts, let me say that at 6:15 there will be a new presentation here, artistic musically. But in the meantime, do feel free to go and check out the workshop on Textile that is taking place on the other side of the statue there, and the music-making plants, really? On the first floor of the Koninklijke Bibliotheek. Go check it out. It's very interesting installation, and it doesn't take long. You will be back in time for the next session at 6:15 if you go there. Enjoy and see you soon. A warm welcome again. Good to see you all. We're going to have a very colorful conversation, I can already tell you, with these four panelists. I see people right there at the back looking what is going to happen. Should I stay? Should I go? I can tell you, you should stay. And there's a lot of space in the front do join us. I promise you, you won't regret it. It's going to be very interesting because we are going to discuss the emperor's new clothes, how to rethink fashion. We've been talking about creating, knitting, chorale in a symbolic way in the workshop over there tomorrow and day after tomorrow. You can go there and participate yourself if you like. We've seen a wonderful performance by the students from a highly specialized institute in France, specialized in textile industry, and now we're going to discuss the beauties and pitfalls maybe of the fashion industry and design industry. We will explore the importance of fashion and design in society for all of us humans, and we will discuss the idea of sustainability in fashion. Are there any ideas about that at all, is the question. And if there are, do they go beyond greenwashing? What would be a sustainable and green ecosystem for the fashion and design industry, and what would it look like? And what is needed to get there? Again, this steps that need to be taken that was referred to in the Brussels discussion. And is it something that the industry needs to take the lead in, or is it a matter for policy makers, for political decision makers, or is it our problem? Us, consumers, is it us who need to decide on how to spend our time and money and how to use our clothes? Top shots in their field in the practice of and passion for fashion have accepted to be part of this panel, so I'll introduce them to you. On my left, Christian Ehler, member of the European Parliament for the Christian Democrats, member of the EPP, and specialized in the EU's contribution to culture, innovation, and technology. I'm introducing these people to you in general terms. Karin Fleck is founder of the Vienna Textile Lab in Austria, with a background, interestingly, in the oil industry. So she brings a scientist's approach to life and a love for loose clothing. I'll ask her to explain why. Tove Norlin, third person on my left, is the founder of Tove Jewels. She's a goldsmith by training and a high-end jewel designer of jewels to last generations, to be passed on as a heirloom. She has a very clear idea of how valuable jewels should be made, valuable in many senses. And gold, you may well know, was in Scandinavia for centuries a symbol of power and rank. So I'm curious to know if Tove still sees it that way. Her designs are nature-based and developed in collaboration with scientists also. And then, last but not least, fourth in the row is Valentin van Arnim, CEO of Iris van Arnim. Valentin is his mother's son, I think I can say so, in that he is CEO of the fashion brand Iris van Arnim in Germany that his mother created. A high-end fashion brand specialized in high-quality cashmere creations sold worldwide. Valentin has a background in management and banking, so he brings added angles to the table. And I found that he has been quoted saying that in Zukunft wird Mode etwas sein, das Menschen Freude bereitet, etwas analogisch zum Anfassen, etwas Schützendes in unserem digitalen Zeitalter. I'll ask him to explain what he means by that. So, could you please welcome our four panelists with a warm applause. Thank you for that. And if my voice cracks, do forgive me. I'm trying to keep the energy level high. When we spoke on the phone, preparing for this conversation, I asked you each to think of an object that you could link to sustainability in fashion, in design. And you've each been thinking about it, and you prepared a story and or an object. So Tova, I would like to start with you. What did you bring?
Well, actually, I bring several objects because I wear the dress that my mother-in-law bought 50 years ago. I think that really shows that if there is the design and the quality, you can wear it 50 years later. And I also brought something that a friend's daughter is doing. She buys clothes from second-hand, and then she makes her own design on it, and she resells it on her social media. So that's the object I brought. A way of reusing.
So nothing is wasted, and the quality is so good that it can last decades,
Yes.
is what I take away
Yes,
from it.
quality and design. It has to have something special to make it a valuable piece also 50 years later.
Thank you very much for that. Valentin von Arnim, what did you bring?
Similar, can you hear me? Yes, similar idea. This is a sweater my mother knitted when I was born, and I wore it. I'm not going to tell you how many years ago, but a few decades. And my 4-month-old daughter is wearing it today. And I think it's not just that the sweater has existed for 40 years, it's actually also the same pattern rip we're using today. So it's the design, it's the quality, and it's something that's mattered to last. And I think my own grandchildren will hopefully wear it one day. And I think if we can achieve that with everything we do in fashion, I think we'll do something right.
Wow, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Karen von Fleck,
Yeah,
tell us.
I wanted to bring the object. It was a glass object, and it was from, I think, Swarovski. And when you put it into the window and the light would come in, it would bring all the color onto the room. And like when I was a kid, I was staring at this for hours, not doing my homework. So I was staring at the effects of the color in the room. So please imagine that.
Okay, we can imagine it, I think, on this canopy, a spatter of color. And did it inspire you in your work, would you say, today?
Yeah, I think so. And also, I can't find it at the moment, so I will look for it.
Oh, that's why you didn't bring it. Not because you were afraid it would break. It has disappeared. Uh-oh.
It's probably in a moving box, so still.
Okay, yeah, hopefully it will resurface. Christian Ehler, what can you tell us about sustainability and what it means to you in fashion terms?
Okay, it's my attempt really to ruin any credibility in politics, but my attempt, I was thinking hard to the emperor's new clothes. And what I brought to you is that. And before you what you actually believe that politics are complete lunatics, I'm, what you haven't mentioned, I'm the co-founder of the German Fashion Council. And I had been informed before I went in politics, the CEO of one of the biggest biotechnology companies in Germany. And we recently did a workshop with scientists, designers, artists, and we presented them a piece of textile which was of red color, fairly comparable to cotton. And this piece of textile would change from red to green 2 weeks later and would vanish after 6 months.
Literally vanish?
Literally vanish, because it's organic chemistry. And this represents the new generation of fibers which you can change by electricity in its density, you can program colors, and you can also program its end. So what I'm not allowed to do, because that is really high-tech and not on the market, and so was the first product, but what I can bring you is the end product.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. You made it totally visible for us. Thank you so much. There's a lot that in these stories is interesting to unpack, so to speak, and we will in the course of the discussion. But I would like to point out again, the new European Bauhaus is about beautiful, sustainable together in the context of working towards a new Green Deal and, as Ursula von der Leyen said, putting a soul in the whole European project. Now, European project is also about democracy, about an idea of humanity, humanistic ideals. So let me start with a very broad and philosophical question, and I'd like to put it to you, Karin Fleck, first. What does fashion, what does design do for democracy and humanity? Isn't it, in say, something very frivolous, in fact?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think the topic that we're concerned with is mostly colors in design. And they do a lot for democracy. So, for instance, each political party has a color. So that's how we identify them. But also, when you look back in the history of color, it was not obtainable for everybody. So, for instance, colors had different values and worth. So there were very expensive colors, maybe only the kings could wear. And only with Industrial Revolution, we don't think about that this blue or the red or the yellow might have a different price. It's for us all achievable and there, and in a way democratic, that we can have them. Because, for instance, like when Caesar was wearing his red coat, that was very expensive. Nobody could afford it. It was not only a symbol that he was visible to everybody, but also that he was really, really rich. Or when you see the clergy, so in church, like the bishops, when they have their very red clothes on, this used to be not only a symbol of Christianity, it was also a symbol of a certain status. And nowadays, you don't think about the color that you wear, that you have a certain status. So I think design can do a lot. Yeah.
And how come color hasn't got that kind of value attached to it anymore then, practically speaking?
That was because when the Industrial Revolution, in that course, synthetic colors were discovered, for instance, from crude oil, and by accident some on purpose. And with growing numbers, they were suddenly cheaper and modifiable, not like natural colors, where the industry hasn't really improved the colors at that time. So for now 150 years, we've been now wearing synthetic colors. And they were also at the time the beginning of organic chemistry, because the scientists discovered so many chemical reactions, so many molecules at the time. Pharmacy wouldn't be possible without that today. But on the other hand, they also have a very negative effect. And a lot of them are not used anymore in fashion today. So that's a bit a different angle now. But everything has a plus and a minus side. On one hand, we don't worry about the colors that we wear. But on the other hand, we should worry about what kind of impact they have.
And we will go into that later. Yeah. Tove, working with precious materials like gold, precious stones as well, what does that say about how affordable or how democratic your work is, or the products you produce?
I was thinking about what a year ago, some archaeologists found in Morocco what is to believe the oldest jewelry in the world. It was dated to 150,000 years. That's around the time when it was Homo sapiens sapiens. So it's a time when I don't even know if we had language as we speak about it today. So with that, I mean, it's something that is very important to the human being, maybe as important as eating, hunting, feeling safe, and wearing jewelry. So it's not something you was talking about frivolous before. I think it's something...
Provocatively speaking.
It's very important for humanity, and jewelry, everybody can wear jewelry, and what I think is important with the jewelry is to put a lot of time in the design and to come with some innovation. It doesn't have to be like a huge innovation, but there should be something special about it to get the raison d'être. So, and but nowadays I work a lot with 3D printing, and for instance, there is a company in Austria who made a new material that is supposed to look like ebony. So instead of slaughtering elephants, you can use this material, and you can create fantastic jewelry with this. So it doesn't have to be gold and diamonds. There are lots of other materials you can do. It's more the idea and the craft behind that is important, I think.
So lots of things to unpack, craftsmanship, innovation, and then what Karin Fleck also mentioned, the danger side or not, and the impact of some of those innovations of the past, so to speak. Valentin von Arnim, you use the word etwas Schützendes. Clothing, of course, protects us from weather, from cold, from other people, you name it. But what did you mean by that?
Well, I come from the knitwear world and sorry, the cashmere world, and I think it's something that you have to feel on your skin. And I think that creates a feeling of protection, of feeling home, of making you feel well. And I think clothing is, in our world here in Europe, you know, you don't need another T-shirt and you don't need another sweater. It's something that is fun, it's joyful, and it's okay to be fun, and it's okay that you use it to express your mood, your feelings, wherever you are, and you should view it that way, not wasteful, but in a way of enjoying it, because if you don't enjoy it, I don't think there's a need to do it. And I think it has that joy to the outside of what you look like, but also has that feeling to the inside, and I think that clothing can be something very protectionist, something that calms you, that makes you feel at home. And I think if you get that feeling, it's also something very valuable in clothing.
So I hear you say also that we can change our clothing according to our moods or how we feel or where we are. Because, of course, if you keep producing nice sweaters like the one you brought, then we wouldn't need to change our clothes very often, and we could just do with, I don't know, 3-5 pieces for a lifetime, which would put you out of business, basically.
Well, I think the world is quite big, and there's so much shit out there that there's a lot of room for good things to do. So I think actually that we would have a much better world if we'd buy much less and think about what we buy, if we think about repairing it, if we think about reusing it, and think consciously about what we buy. So I'm not so worried about that if people keep their clothing for a long time, we'll go out of business. I think that is the business of the future.
Mr. Ehler, how big is the fashion industry, in fact, and in Europe? Do you have a figure in mind, or design industry? How important is it?
It's roughly 300,000 companies, most of them small and medium-sized companies, actually very small companies. But it is also big. I mean, if you look to Hermès or LVMH, there might be really, that is world-leading. So the variety is really from very small and very individual to European USP. That might be, of all sectors in the European industry, the sector where there is the strongest European USP. There is in biotechnology, in whatever kind of sector would have, there's global competition. On fashion, actually we lead the world. And so you have an amazing variety of from craftsmanship to something which is really a global economy.
But still, am I right that it took a while for it to be taken seriously as an industry in European context?
True. I mean, we started roughly 10 years ago in the Parliament, of all places, we had an intergroup, which had in an evening a glass of wine, and then we thought, what is the creative industry? And that was a little bit the Kissinger question. I mean, if you want to talk to the Europeans, which telephone number you use? And that was really the challenge also for the creative industry and also for fashion industry, because it was a misunderstanding on both sides. So politics wouldn't understand much, wouldn't understand that there is no industry where more young people are employed than in the fashion industry, or that the creative industry as an umbrella is bigger than the automotive industry or chemical industry. But on the other hand, it was vice versa. So when we were asking the creative industry and then in more detail the fashion industry, who are you? And they said, yeah, that we are high brands, we are craftsmanship, there was everything. So and it was a process over 10 years that very successfully the industry, although I wouldn't call it industry, but I think the textile and the artists and what embraces the idea of clothing would somehow understand that it would make sense to have a kind of organizational and a voice in society. And it took us a while to understand what that is, because we thought it's fancy clothing, and we have a registering number for the steel industry, and that's heavy steel, light steel, and whatsoever. But we never had an idea what this industry is actually embracing. And so it took almost a decade for us, but also I think it was, in the very beginning, a very alienating process, but now it's a very strong voice in politics, actually.
Yeah, and also a big part of this festival being discussed from a number of angles. Karin Fleck, I said in the beginning that you promote loose clothing, loose-fitting clothing. So I'm sitting here with a stretch jeans, and I was expecting you actually in a flowy kind of pair of trousers. It's something in between. But tell us about that, because there's a whole reasoning behind it.
Yeah. So, for instance, I started watching a lot of YouTube channels, and I came across this Asian lifestyle channel. And I noticed that people in Asia, when they wear much wider clothes, for instance. And there was also, I think also here in Belgium, there's something called Hack Belgium. And there was an ideation and a startup that thought about how to make clothes different where you don't have confection sizes. Because confection sizes is one reason why, if it doesn't, you never know when you produce them how many people will buy a certain size. And that means there's always leftover. For instance, also if you go back again with talking about history, like maybe 100, 200 years ago, people would also make clothes differently because they would be adjustable to your body. And so you wouldn't go shopping that often, like as Valentin says, maybe the consume would also be changing. I think it's also a product of the industry a bit that we are so used to our sizes that it is normal for us to, to get a new fitting T-shirt or a dress, yeah, or a suit, for instance, that needs to fit, yeah. And then, okay, you change your body size, yeah, and then you have to start all over again. How frustrating is that? What if you could stay in your clothes for longer? Yeah, I think that would also be like alone in the design is already the key for sustainability or for less consumption.
Okay, because before we get into the solutions and the future, if we list the problems, is that the main problem, if I may say so, that there is mass production, overproduction, the overturn of our use of clothing is too high, would you say? Anyone? You can...
100%. Yes. I mean, the numbers, which is quite interesting, nobody really knows the numbers. And, the Business of Fashion quotes, the MacArthur Foundation quotes another foundation that goes circular. Nobody really knows the real primary source. So numbers go between 10 to 30% of clothing is not worn at all.
10 to 30%?
10 to 30% of clothing, textile being produced. But again, I'm quoting numbers where nobody knows the primary source. So the problem really is actually the big companies and government will have to put money into research to really find out. Also, in terms of carbon oxide being produced, some claim it's 7 billion tons, some claim it's 10 billion. So nobody knows the real numbers. But really, the main problem, I think, is overproduction. It's just insane of how much is being thrown away. So that needs to start right away. And we need to find a way to include real cost. So real cost into something, because when we produce in Europe today, we have the problem actually of finding people who can do it. So we do still a lot of handwork, and we don't find the women anymore who can do hand knitting. And it's really quite, and all of these women mostly are 50 years and older. None of the young women want to do it anymore, all the handcraft work. And so we hear, but on the, when you go further east and other sites, it's about pollution, wastewater, abuse of labor. So we have to find a way of including that in cost to make that actual piece find the real cost to it.
Okay, you say that it's a big problem, the biggest problem. That was the question. Also, of course, you're speaking from the point of a perspective of a producer who thinks in not small but very targeted and thinking about what we put out. Can we actually market it and sell it? It's a business model in itself. So if you think about mass production in your sector, I think in your segment that's not the issue, is it?
No, but of course within jewelry we have mass productions, and that is especially as a European country, myself, I always want to do it in Europe, because there I have the control. I can contact the business, I can visit them. It's many times I work with family-owned small business. So you feel you have the same values, the same goal, and also that, you know, here we have the European laws, using what chemicals and working in what environmental. So if I put it out in some other countries far away, suddenly I lose power to steer what they are doing. So therefore, that is one thing, try to keep the production near the company, because then you have more control. For instance, gold you can always melt. So that's a good thing, it's a recyclable. In Sweden, when I do the jewelry, we always use 100% recycling gold, and everybody does this, so it's not like I do it, that's the thing. So that's and it keeps for a long time also, gold. So there is, but then you have the mining part. I called one of the biggest mining companies in Sweden, and they rather not talk about their environmental problems. I think it's better to talk about it. Say yes, we do have these problems, and we need to do something about it, because everybody still needs gold. Not for only jewelry. I mean, it's for everybody, all in technical and mobiles and so on. So it's better to talk about it and try to do something about it, and trying to not just hide away like this company.
I hear two things already. I'll let you jump in a second. So we're talking about mass production, overproduction, too much production, and then about the production process. We'll get into that. I want to stick for a moment to the overproduction. Is that because we are like putting in the producer's hands, just buying what they promote and propagate and bombard us with publicity with? Or is it because this is the capitalist system and clothing manufacturers want to make a profit? Wherein lies the change? Or the possible change?
Now, what we see is, I mean, clothing is part of, in economic theory, a part of satisfied consumer markets. We're in the autumn of capitalism. It's very funny that I say that as a Christian conservative. But in the autumn of satisfied consumer markets, how do you create demand? Because demand in economical theory is that something gets destroyed, you want to replace it, or you have a very new idea and that brings you forward. But that is not the logic of, let's say, satisfied consumer markets. What happens with clothing, as it is with a lot of creative products, is simply that the idea how to create demand is that you have to create an artificial shortage. And you do an offer in our societies that you substitute, let's say, social ranking, the kind of perception of yourself which had been done by society, by clubs, or you were a knight or something like that. You had been substituting that in the late phase of capitalism by consumption defines you. So the offer of, let's say, the traditional consumer market is that no longer your social surrounding defines you, it defines what you can consume. And even more, it defines what you wear. And to tickle that logic or drive it to the extreme is that this industry managed to define what is beauty. So, I mean, what is the beauty ideal in the 20th century, late 20th century, first 21st century, is blonde, blue-eyed, and size 36. That's genetically a vanishing minority in our society. From the Stone Age on, they got less and less blonde, less and less blue-eyed, and less size 36, because it doesn't refer to the logic of nutrition and whatever. So we defined an ideal which excludes practically 89% of the population from that ideal. But if you can constitute the ideal, we offer the rest to saying, okay, you don't fit perfectly to the ideal, but there is relief. Clothing, cosmetics, whatever. And we have to be aware that the logic of satisfied consumer markets, which are not longer driven by the classical demand function, is that kind of logic. So it's not just simply that they want to produce more, it's the inner logic of a lot of creative products that you drive that simply because you offer social definition, self-esteem, and whatsoever. And then you can practically, from then on, if you establish that, you can sell everything, every time, every month, for every money.
For a long, long time. Okay, very nice example, very nicely put. If we then move on to the production process, before we go into the solutions, coming from the oil industry, you already mentioned the danger inherent in some coloring processes, poisonous, what have you. We know about chemicals that are being used, and there's European lawmaking in the making as well, and created already. What are the pitfalls at this time, according to you, in the production process of textiles, for example? Some were already mentioned, the lack of craftsmanship here, having to go further east, for example, where you don't control labor conditions. Anything else that comes to mind?
I think also like there's new production methods, like for instance, biotechnology that could change the global supply chains, because in order to manufacture something from biological nature, you don't need the typical supply chains for platform chemicals, for instance, like chemicals we use as a precursors to, for instance, colors, but also other materials. And I think, like especially in the situation where we're now, these new types of production systems would help the industry. Also because you need really well-educated workers. It's not a mass production as such. It's like, for instance, biotechnology is something that happens in a big vessel, but to operate the vessel, you need specific stuff. And I think that could be a possibility to move, for instance, also production back to Europe.
You have that specialized personnel and the skills.
Yeah. And it pushes, on one hand, science, but also it sort of allows even a whole country to be independent, because you can source your own waste streams, you can source from your agricultural stuff. And it doesn't really matter in which climate zone you are or which labor conditions you have, because the level of workers employed is a different level than if you have a mass production, for instance, where you have like hundreds of people doing the same thing all over again. Yeah.
Okay. We'll pick that up in the second half. But when you mentioned gold and the fact that it's supposed to be fair trade gold in Sweden or reused.
Reused, I said.
Reused.
Yes.
Is it possible to? I mean, we know it for coffee, right? Fair trade coffee. Anyone?
Well, we also saw the documentary how fair trade it was.
Well, yeah. So there's always the danger that we don't know the whole story. But
it is.
Does it make sense, a fair trade label for gold or precious metals? Is it conceivable?
Yeah, well, the whole thing is of eco-labeled. I don't know how many documentaries I've seen now within the fish industry, coffee industry, everything. It's just they just bought them. It's then they just turn out to be nothing behind, and this is really frightening. So now I'm always very afraid to buy these things, whatever it is. They have been trying for a long time to talk about green gold, and but as we all come back to the transparency. How should anyone be able to check whether this is true or not? And here is the key. I think that this is a key thing to be able to check the transparency for all these companies working with whether it's coffee or gold.
And how can that be organized, do you think? At what level?
I don't know. It could be a ministry of transparency, but you know, it's a huge, because then someone have to check it. Each company needs to be checked. And as we were saying, many times you hear someone just mention a number or something. It is, I think it's easier if you work with smaller companies, as I was saying before, closer by. Then at least you have a possibility to check it. Mm-hmm. If you work, and I can buy gold from Sweden because I can go to the mine and I can check it. At least I can hope that the Swedish laws would at least forbid something. And if I would point at some chemical used, something would happen. If it's in a totally different country, far away, it would be impossible for me to check.
Kashmir too, Valentin van Arnim, the source of your creations is also something that is sourced from other countries. How do you deal with these issues of transparency on where it comes from, how it's being produced?
First, cashmere has to come from China or Mongolia. So all of the cashmere goats live on the outer skirts of the desert Gobi because that's a natural environment. Already the English kings and French kings, they imported the cashmere goats and then thought, it's cold enough in Scotland and leave them in the winter, but the grass is too nutritious, and as soon as the goat eats English grass, it builds fats against the cold in the winter. So the goats require the natural environment of the very dry deserts to build that fine hair. So it always comes from there. And actually the goat has one problem. It only rains there once a year, so the grass is very dry. It eats the grass with the roots, so it grabs it and pulls it out. So you need to watch out that you only have that many goats per square kilometer. And actually the Chinese government, you may think a lot about the Chinese, but in that respect they're quite good. They have 100% regulated and controlled how many goats are there per square kilometer to keep that population and that business alive. So it's highly regulated already from the beginning on. And then and that industry, it's obviously a very small industry, but you can imagine, so a regular kilo of cashmere raw material costs today about 150 euros. You can buy it also $130, $140. But if you buy a cashmere sweater for 69 euros or 79 euros, it is impossible to do. So there is a certain threat point where it doesn't work anymore, where you have to, there's a certain price to the product, otherwise it's impossible to do. And otherwise...
What are you buying if you buy a cashmere sweater of 60 euros? And if it's not, then it cannot be a 100% proper cashmere sweater.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So there's one way, and obviously nobody really controls it, is when you comb the cashmere goat. It's a natural process. Instead of, usually when they were living free before, they're still all living free in herds. But before that, they would lose their winter hair by rubbing themselves on the dry bushes. And now instead of rubbing themselves on the bushes, the goaters use combs. And when you comb the cashmere goat, you get about 1.2 to 1.3 kilograms of materials. And that material is then filtered, and only about 250 grams of that fine cashmere hair remains. Now you can change the filters and leave more of the thicker hair in it. So you still have hair from the cashmere goat in it, and you can still claim it's cashmere because it's from the cashmere goat. But as soon as you wash that sweater 2 or 3 times, and as soon as you wear it, you will realize what quality it is. The problem is that you don't know in the moment you buy, because you can wash that material so soft that you can't feel it. So it really comes through wearing where you realize that it's not real material.
And before we round that off, but how much control do you have over that whole process to be sure that you work with the top quality?
Experience, history, it's about working with the same supplier for 30, 40 years, that you trust that he's delivering the best material. I mean, obviously we test it, we buy every year, we're also then large enough to buy certain quantities, but you need to build that relationship.
Build a relationship, more transparency, control on labor conditions and so on. Is that something that you feel on a European level can be addressed, or is that, dreaming?
No, it must be addressed on the European level because it's the only leverage we have. That's the biggest consumer market in the world, not China, not the United States, it's Europe. And if the biggest consumer market in the world decides to regulate, that's mostly likely to happen. The question is a little bit how to do. So we have in Europe this precautionary principle, so we set up a very complicated supply chain surveillance, whatever, and a variety of things, and then do we scientific advice and so on and so. I think the most robust, although then to some extent fairly American principle is liability. I mean, if you're a CEO or in the board, you don't care really about whether you control your labels or whatsoever, and you pay a lot of money to set up a system which might be okay but might be questionable. But as soon as you have a direct liability as a CEO, as soon as you have a strong interest in that, and you can see that the taxes And you can see that with reliability. And when we talk to our American colleagues, usually very robust and not as concerned about environmental issues, but they have a very robust idea how to steer a market, and that's liability. And if you pay for the first time a fee of 150 million, and you don't have an insurance for that as a board, and you pay it yourself, then you get control on things like that. So there's a lot of discussion about methodology, and I think what we did, this kind of labels which had been partly invented, partly had been business models, partly just poor attempts to do so, I think that's not going to work. I think we will have a relatively robust grip on that.
And do you think there's a majority for that?
Yeah, that's, you're going to see, I mean, what you see here, we're in midst of a revolution.
I'm asking because there's a time pressure in this climate issue and so on. Of course, not only in the fashion industry, but in broad terms.
Yeah, but in 8 years from now, I mean, there will be every producer in Europe, whatever it produces, and also if it produces fashion or clothes or textile or whatever, has to reduce its carbon footprint by 55%. That's nothing less than a revolution. And what you're going to see as an addition, and you see that already in the textile strategy of the Commission coming, in 15 years from world, we are no longer living in the cotton world. Because the shortage of water, the complexities, the wars already taking place in Africa on water, on the Nile water, that will lead us in a different world. So we're in midst of a transformative decade which is going to come. And in 10 years, we're going to live in a different world, and you're going to wear different clothing, by the way.
Let's look into the future. Karin Fleck, you are creating the future, let's say. Well, you are. Because you are working on a different way to create color. You already referred to it, but can you briefly explain what it is you do and how it would create a more sustainable use of color, and would it allow us, consumers, to still wear every season if we want to, different colors, bright colors, and so on?
Okay, so first of all, what are we doing? So the Vienna Textile Lab is using microbes as a manufacturing unit for textile colors. So we work together with an Austrian artist that has been collecting microbes all over the place. For instance, in the Danube, he found a microbe that produces a beautiful pink. You wouldn't expect it in the Danube. We bring that to the laboratory and look at this microorganism a bit closer. Most of them are bacteria, some of them are fungi. And then we see, okay, the color that they produce, do these colors work on textiles? Because not all colors will ever dye textiles, for instance. So we check if it has this affinity. And then we see, okay, in bioengineering, can it compete, for instance, can it be upscaled? Can it be used in such a way that it is competitive to synthetic dyes? So this is what we're doing, and so we're combining the knowledge of biotechnology, of chemistry as well, because the affinity to the fiber, that's still a chemical bond, but also from, knowledge from the industry, from the dyeing.
And does it produce the colors that we're used to? Like these ladies have brightly colored scarves, for example?
Yeah, I think, for instance, the pink of the lady reminds me of the pink that we have. So, yes.
Created by
microbes. Yeah. It's still in development. You cannot buy them yet. But what I want to say is basically we're discovering more and more colorful aspects. And these microbes are, what they actually do is they replace a whole bunch of petrochemistry before that, because instead of using materials that come out from crude oil originally, refining, first of all exploration, refining, then making bulk chemicals, fine chemicals, and then finally you get to your color, this little cell is doing it all by its own. You just need to feed it, and it feeds on biological substances. We call it the soup. Yeah, so
the soup.
The soup.
Okay, practical people, these scientists.
So, and how does it help? So, on one hand, like when we started, we had a very broad idea how we can influence the industry. But most of all, it is because people like Valentin, they come to us and say, listen, we dye wool with synthetic colors, and our end product is, for instance, not biodegradable or not better biodegradable because synthetic colors do not biodegrade that well. Yeah? Not all of them, but some. So we want to have a final product that we can sell our clients that there is natural wool and there's a natural color on it. So we can claim that this is all one natural product. So this is one thing that we help the industry with. Also, the whole process to do this produces less waste, because a lot of these waste streams can be reused because they're of biological matter. And then, in a maybe not so intended way from the European Union, we're also helping biodiversity, because we look at all these microbes, and some of them are not known before. So we look at the whole biodiversity of Europe and also put them on a podest, because they can do quite a lot. And normally we would have just ignored them. So we learn a lot about the little world that we don't see so well. Yeah?
And when do you think, envisage, is this a project that can be put into practice in 10 years, in 20 years, in 30 years?
No, I think this is something like 5 years from now, you will find this on the market. And it also, like, in the industry itself. So we talk about mass production. So there's one thing is to produce more and more color. You know, we don't envision ourselves as a company that is the next big chemical company. Yeah, this is not our target. It's more to have an impact. And one of the things is that also the industry requires different models. For instance, why not bring your clothes back and re-dye it? So there are models like this. So we also look into the possibility you purchase a piece for life, but you might alter it in life. So like, for instance, Patagonia does when they have the repair service, for instance, for their clothes. Yeah.
Thank you. That provides a perspective, let's say. But then, okay, this is one aspect. But then, Toe, I want to bring you into the discussion again, because we need to talk some more about the craftsmanship, I think, because that is really at the heart also of this whole production process. How are we, I mean, as a society, going to find people who want to do it, are able to do it, are inspired to do it? Is it still possible, do you think, at all? Or have we passed that stage, and do we need to look elsewhere, literally or figuratively?
No, I don't think it will never die. I myself, I saw an exhibition at the Louvre when I was 22, and that was the first time I saw something, jewelry from René Lalique, and that's when I decided I didn't even know that existed. And I totally decided to go to be a goldsmith. And I think that's one thing, to show the craft. The craft, as I said in the beginning, you found this piece of jewelry 150,000 years ago. It's something essential in our lives. So to show culture, to show craftsmanship is one very important way to go. And maybe also to keep up the status to be a craftsman. It has sometimes, at least in Sweden, it's been like, no one should study for craftsmen. It's better to go to university. So everybody goes to university, even if they don't want to. And instead of trying to...
looked down upon as something, working with your hands or something?
Yes, I mean, to work with something hands, it could be... that's something fantastic. And I think that is something also from politicians and from the society side, they can help to bring this forward to the young generation. You have very often your own companies, your own person, but then there are also the bigger companies. We were talking about Hermès before, who has fantastic craftsmen. You can work for a company like... I mean, there are a broad palette of way to work as a craftsman, and many times you are quite your own person that can decide for yourself.
And it's interesting because, of course, the craftsmanship was also at the heart of the original Bauhaus, and is taken on board now in many of the discussions we've been having here, importance and recognition of its importance in many industries. Production process innovation is also something you mentioned. Could you tell us a bit more about this new idea that you brought to the jewels you design and you bring to the market, because it's a wonderful story, I think.
It was I'm working together with the researchers, so I could see how the nature is actually creating the word, and that geometry is very different because you don't have any cubes, so you don't even have any spheres. It's always a hole somewhere, so the energy can to pass around. And so working with researchers, I could use this kind of new geometry and knowledge. So I create everything in the computer, and then it's 3D printed into wax, and then it can be cast in whatever material. So
inspired by designs in nature, and I particularly remember that you looked
yes.
at skin close up.
Yes, this here I have my. This is actually the pattern from skin. So I was working with the dermatologist to define this, and I use this now in all my jewelry. I think it's a fantastic pattern.
Okay, do look it up. So, Valentin, now we've said, okay, we need to invest in innovation, innovative techniques, be more curious about what is happening around us and how it can help, find and invest in craftsmanship and educate the next generation of creatives. But what about the industry? I mean, Hermès was referred to as one of the exemplary fashion houses that is thinking about how to be a green fashion label. There's a lot of talk about green jeans and green this and green that. Is it always, do they always walk the talk, or is it often not just greenwashing, basically?
Well, you have to start somewhere. Obviously, there's a ton of greenwashing going on, and it's quite frustrating, but you have to start. And the process of getting there is a long way, and you have to force companies, and it does start with policy, and it does start with liability, and there are things you can do. I mean, you can offset your carbon footprint. You can require companies to do that. Obviously, that's a very politically difficult question, but it's actually not that expensive. And we're trying to do that for our entire process, and we had an institute trying to calculate this. And for us, actually, it costs 65,000 euros a year to offset our carbon footprint. And I think it's a doable cost to handle for that part. And so you start with policy, and you start with educating, and obviously a business of fashion now does a big index on sustainability and how well companies are performing, and Puma right now is on #1, and I think they do a lot of things badly, and I do not know how they ended up at #1, but you start, and you start ranking companies, you start forcing them, and it's a long process. And even though if it's not waterproofed on all sides, you've got to do it.
Okay, now we have to look at ourselves to round it off, the consumer. We started by saying we over...
You started earlier, is it the responsibility of government or business or consumer? And it obviously has to be all three. That's the only way it works.
It interacts.
It
yes.
interacts.
But if we zoom in on the consumer, what's wrong with us, and how can we change, apart from buying in 10 years maybe naturally colored clothes or microbiotic colored clothes?
But it's education and actually marketing in a positive way. You talked before about marketing, about creating these shortages that are not actually shortages, but they're just marketing ideas of certain. And you can create the same marketing idea using in terms of sustainability and positive. So put the best creative heads at it, make it interesting, make people want to have it. And I think that's happening. I think there are a lot of younger companies out there doing that, and I think there's a lot of ways. So it's on both sides, education, and on the marketing side, but make it sexy, make it interesting, and that's possible. And companies are not doing enough yet, but we're getting there.
Short poll. Who here buys new clothes every new season? Be fair, be honest.
Nobody honest.
You're all convinced already. You do? You do too? Come on. Show of hands? Yes, thank you. Very honest. Influenced by influencers on Instagram as well? Are you influenced by influencers on Instagram or? Okay. And who looks forward to clothes colored by the process that Karin described? Can you imagine something like that? You would look at the label and say, even the lady in pink, even if it's not that pink anymore, you would. Great. Thank you so much. Yeah, there's a lot more we could be saying. Maybe one last question for you.
The problem we have in politics, and that's, I would like to come in the end back to that, why we're doing the new Bauhaus. What is the idea that a 60-year-old president of the commission, strange creatures than me, artists, Rem Koolhaas, and so on, so are somehow aligning behind that idea. The problem we're describing is in politics in our society, we addressing a creature of different nature. So we talk to citizens, and if you tell them, do you want the end of the world? No, they don't want. Do you want to pollute your surrounding? No, they don't want. Do you want to spend a certain amount of money for that? Yeah, they want. But the interesting thing is, compared to what I've been describing before, politics is addressing, or societal discussions in a more broader sense are addressing citizens perhaps 5 minutes a day, 3. Whereas this machine of consumption, which is perfect, it's on the wonderful, totally perverted, but it's also in its beauty unique, is addressing the same citizen as a consumer practically permanently. So you have a consumer starting in the morning, a citizen saying in the morning, I want to care about that. And this creature is going to change, this 14-year-old not going to school and fighting for nature, is entering a very cheap shop. And that moment it's going to change from a citizen to a consumer. And the same girl says, oh, the T-shirt is €8. And it's colorful, and somehow, and the YouTuber said to me, it's the right way, and so on. So we are addressing a creature of a strange, changing nature. At one hand, it's a citizen, but at the same moment, it changes to consumer. And the Bauhaus idea is not to address the consumer, but the Bauhaus idea is we are not going to have the new Mao look. The reason why a lot of people are reluctant, if they're really honest, is they don't want to buy boring shit. I mean, sustainability was very much related to very ideological things, and you wanted to show it's sustainable, and how would you show that it's sustainable? It looked poor. 100%. So, and I think that the new Bauhaus's idea is to align the idea of sustainability to the reality of societies. There are individuals who want to look good, who want to express themselves. And how we are going to do that, we are totally dependent on the creative sector. If the creative sector doesn't help our politics, sustainability is not going to work. And that is why we so almost plea to the creative sector to help us to get this idea of a more sustainable world through, and not by limiting creativity, individuality or something like that. And that is Bauhaus. We need the Bauhaus and this idea to merge that, the reality of production, artist, creativity, individuality, the way to express yourself, individuality by your clothing, but together with the potential of sustainability. And if we succeed, the new Bauhaus is really the element which needs to be successful. Without that, it's not going to work.
And that's what they call a closing statement. We've come to the end of this panel session. I thank you very much. This is the Bauhaus put into practice, exchange of ideas with people from different backgrounds, different expertise, different parts of Europe. So thank you, Valentin from Arnhem, Tove Norlen, Karin Fleck, and Christian Ehler. And thank you for being here, for sharing the energy and listening so attentively. Have a wonderful evening. Don't go too far, because at 8:30, we have Ukrainian musicians to present to you. So be back and do join us for that. Until then, have a nice evening. Enjoy each other's company. See you.